Welcome to the World Builders Anvil, episode 189. Considerations when writing about polarizing topics. Oh boy.
I disagree with you.
Wrong. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. Welcome back. As always, my name is Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And as most of the time, I am Michael Miller.
Only on every other Thursday now? Is that what it is?
No, it's when it's most convenient to me and when it benefits me. And if I'm in trouble, then I tell everyone I'm Jeffrey.
Yeah. I usually just call you Mike anyway, so what would I know?
I don't know who you're talking about.
All right. So today, I decided we've been having so much fun on the show. I'm going to bring a doubter in on people and talk about polarizing topics. And what I mean by that is
that's not what you said. You said we were doing something totally different. You told me we were going to do a different topic than this topic.
Yeah, but
I guess we have a difference of opinion of what we're going to talk about today.
Well, but if we talk about it rationally, then we're missing the point.
Yeah, I'd rather be talking irrationally. That's way more fun.
And it's a skill of yours. Okay. But the idea is a polarized topic is really, it's something where there's no gray area. Whether or not there is in real life is unimportant. It's become a binary. You're either A or B, and there's nothing left in the middle. And in the age of the internet, it allows people to really go on tangents on this stuff. So whether you're intentionally rolling in polarizing topics, which is, I want to say right off the bat, an awesome thing to do, but realize that when you're talking about these things, this might become what your book is about. You're not going to be talking about your world. You're going to be talking about the characters. You're going to be talking about these topics. Or most of the time you will be. So just go in it knowing up front that these things can lead you to problems even if you don't intend them.
I think that like this episode for me particularly is going to get very meta because I have what might be a polarizing opinion on people dealing with polarizing topics.
No, you don't.
I don't?
No.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I do.
I'm not very good at this.
Sure you are.
But
we're just going to do that. We're just going to polarize. We're going to just contradict each other the entire episode. Everything you say, I'm going to go against you. Do the same.
Exactly. But one of the things to keep in mind is ultimately we're not judging the opinions that you have. We might or might not agree with them as humans.
I am going to judge them.
I'm saying it from the concept of the show. You as a human might do that, but the show itself is not here to say what side of an argument is correct.
Oh, no, definitely
We're
not.
here just to say that there's an argument here and to be warned that even accidentally treading these areas could derail you.
And I know that I already have a few plans to mention some certain opinions, so try not to hold against the show what my personal opinions might be.
Mm-hmm. Just hold them against Michael. Or Mike. Hold him against Mike, yeah.
Yeah, hold against Mike, yeah. Forget that guy.
That guy's a jerk.
Yeah.
Okay, so now, ultimately, your opinions are your opinions, and we're not here to argue one way or the other for these opinions on the show. At least I'm not. Michael will do whatever he wants to, and that Mike might intervene sometimes. But the thing is, realize there's nothing wrong with there's some great pieces of art. You see, especially a lot in dystopian. That's typically what dystopian fiction is. It takes a binary position on something and creates a whole negative world about it. But you see it throughout science fiction and fantasy, at least in threads at times. So there's nothing wrong with doing it. And sometimes you will accidentally step into it. But I would actually encourage people to do it. You should have opinions on things, and you should present your art the way it should be.
That was actually, I was just about to say that is, especially with science fiction, you see it a lot with science fiction. I find that you see it a little more with science fiction than with fantasy, but it still should be there for fantasy. I think good fantasy does what science fiction does in that you should be reflecting something in the real world. And this is my opinion when it comes to genre writing. You should be writing about something that you're not actually writing about. Like when we've talked about mission statements or like the purpose of your novel or story or whatever it is, if you boil it down to the point where you just have one basic message, I like to choose that be an opinion, that be how you're looking at society or life or a given subject or what have you. And that's what's in the book. So it doesn't necessarily have to be polarizing, but I don't see there's anything wrong with choosing a polarizing subtext.
Absolutely not. And I would agree with that completely.
You can't agree with that completely. That goes right against being polarizing, Jeff.
Yes, I can.
No, you can't.
Yes, I can.
What's the next bullet point?
All right. One of the things to keep in mind, too, is the closer things resemble to Earth. So you'll get this a lot more in alt-Earth, or if there's a historical element on Earth in an alt-Earth, the closer they resemble to things that happen on Earth, the more likely you are to receive impassioned feedback. And I think one of the reasons some fantasy gets away with it is some of it's obvious in fantasy. Like typically when you have different races, like elves and dwarfs, you can a lot of times books will slip into like racist talks there. Not always, but they do. But the closer they resemble the arguments on Earth, that's where it'll become more noticeable to people. And like I said, sometimes you won't even know it's going to happen. Just be ready. And now some of you might be worried. Don't worry about your sales with this. It might or might not hurt sales. And to be honest, it might never be detected unless you make sales in the first place. So, try and sell your book, and people, the more sales you get, the more likely you are to have someone who's going to find a problem with it. And the better you sell, the more they'll be looking for an issue to create with it.
Yeah, the irony is that sometimes if you just happen to have something really polarizing, it might be a selling point, even if people are not liking the position that you've chosen.
Yeah.
But you also have to be understanding that what you put in there might become a very, it might become a larger topic of discussion than you intend it to be. But the bottom line is you're never going to know exactly what everybody's going to jump on. For instance, Jeff and I were just talking about this. I'm pretty sure it's Ready Player One. I thought it was Armada because I've read Ready Player One. I'm currently finishing up Armada. And I'm pretty sure it's in Ready Player One. There's a part where one character is asking another character about gender. And the character defines gender and now mind you, it's a romantic inquiry. They're talking to each other through some sort of internet chat thing. So the guy is trying to inquire if the girl is in fact a girl or if she's just presenting herself as a girl. So he says something like, are you a girl or have you always been a girl born? Or she might ask like, how do you define it or something? And he says something to the effect of, born a girl and have never had a gender reassignment. Which, as reading it, now mind you, I'm just giving you a little snippet from it, but I remembered reading it and it didn't come across in any way to me as offensive. It just seemed like, because the kid's like 15 years old, that he's just the character, not the writer. That the character is just saying this is either, ignorantly saying this is how I define a woman, or just socially not considering and saying this is the type of person I'd like to date, someone who has not had a gender reassignment.
Which could definitely happen with humans.
Right, which could definitely happen. And in either case, it didn't seem like the writer was going out of his way in any way, shape, or form to negatively marginalize people who have gender reassignment or people who have difficulty with defining their sexuality throughout their upbringing. Some people, it's very easy. Other people have a very arduous road and even an entire difficult life based on gender. And I don't think that the writer was intent to say anything negative about that. If anything, I think he was just trying to make the character seem ignorant. Yeah. But I honestly don't even know that he put that much thought into it and just thought, how would a 15-year-old answer this question? So that's how I read it. Now, I have not had a gender reassignment. I have not had difficulty with my gender throughout my life. So maybe it's unfair for me to interpret it that way. But I read this Twitter feed on it that had this whole thread of a whole bunch of people jumping all over not only the conversation from the book, not only the entire book, but the writer and how it speaks to them. And I'm like, wow, you guys are being really unfair to this guy when it was what to me seemed like an innocuous statement. So, I don't know if it's unfair of me to take that judgment, but at the same time, everyone's entitled to their opinion. And since these people had theirs, I had mine. But the bottom line is, the long and the short of it is, you as the writer, even if you are, incredibly, incredibly careful, you still might piss some people off. And for me, and this is definitely my opinion, I'm okay with that. I'm going to try to be respectful to people. I'm not going to go out of my way to piss people off. But if I happen to piss people off, okay, there's, 7 billion people in the world. I can't keep them all happy. I can't make them all like me. And that's okay. That's totally fine. My world is big enough for me to accept that there are people that are not going to like my art, not going to like my opinions, not going to like me as a person. And that's okay. And I think that if all of us can get that it's not going to be too tough on your art. Like, you shouldn't let trying to pander to every single person's opinion, you shouldn't let that impact what you want to say and how you want to write.
Well, here's what Michael completely missed on the subject. Sorry. I should have been watching more of those stupid news shows to prepare for this episode. Okay. Now,
which stupid news shows? Anything on Fox?
or CNN or MSNBC. To me, I think they're all ridiculous.
Pretty much.
They're all part of this problem. Now, the thing to keep in mind is, even if you go out of your way and go through this list and do more research and find every topic that could be offensive and avoid it, you could offend people for not talking about it. So, so remember, like Michael said, you can't please everyone. Don't consider that. Consider the work that you're doing. And do your best within that.
Jeffrey Ingram's latest novel really had the hinging possibility of taking on a serious topic of race relations in the United States, but he decided to softball it by not really addressing the issue, even though his two races were clearly metaphors for, this race and that race and blah,
exactly.
blah, blah, blah.
And so one thing to keep in mind, too, is I have this noted as current or classical. There are always subjects that come up, and they might be big in the news for a while, and then they might fade away and never come back. And there are certain ones that seem to have been around for a really long time. And I kind of worked them both in here, and they're kind of wound together. But the other interesting thing I've noticed, too, I kind of consider myself off the spectrum when it comes to political spectrum. I don't like what the Democrats say about the Republicans. I don't like what the Republicans say about the Democrats. And I kind of see the arguments both ways. But the thing I do notice is typically it's a binary position for these, but the two positions will shift between the sides. So the one side won't consider themselves what the other side considers them, at least not most of the time, and they'll have a different opinion about the other side that the other side will have about themselves. So in here, you might disagree with where positions might be, and that's really the angle you're coming at it from. Just understand that when people look at it, they pretty much, even though there could be a spectrum of issues on some of these, there's somewhere I don't see a middle ground. But for most of these, there really are a spectrum of ideas. And, to me personally, if you're not directly harming someone in what you're doing, it's an idea, and ideas I don't believe cause harm.
Ooh.
I know. I just said that. I just triggered someone.
I was gonna say I might have to disagree with ideas not hurting people, because they certainly do sometimes.
I just mean in a permanent kind of sense. Yes, I'm a big believer in sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. You can call me any word you want to. go to Facebook, just start railing me with words. I might block you if you annoy me because you spam me. But if you don't, I won't really care any words that you call me, even if they're accurate and even if they're offensive, because that's just life. And I get over that kind of stuff, but, now if you're trying to use words to victimize someone, that's different. That's trying to turn words into a weapon. I just mean, ideas in general don't hurt people. Now I've actually probably created a new polarized thing and people have now unsubscribed. Excellent job, Jeffrey. Now let's continue with creating more unsubscriptions because our download numbers have been too good. Okay. Environment. This is one, and I don't think it's quite as big as it was a couple of years ago. I think there are still some really highly entrenched camps here. But you just kind of looking at it, it's not near the top of people's concerns anymore. But it's one where people that do have opinions, even if it's not important to them, they're typically binary. It's either you love the environment, you're worried about climate change, or you're a flat earther. I personally think there's a lot of room in the middle there. You could be concerned about the environment. You could even think, people might have an effect on climate change or do have an effect on climate change, but you just don't know how much effect there is and haven't seen the science to back that up. And since everyone seems to consider themselves a scientist today and have the ability to manage science from reading headlines, that validate or don't validate their opinion. Whew, I was kind of rude there. I apologize. I'll let Michael take the next one.
Oh, lovely. So the next one here on our list of subjects that are going to be polarizing, you had to know this was coming, abortion.
Yeah.
I'm the type of person that it's kind of funny because you're talking about your different views on Democrat and Republican and being somewhere in the middle. I generally have about 12 different opinions on any given subject.
At least, yeah.
I am pro-choice because it shouldn't be my decision, but I am pro-life for my life. Like, I think that people should have the right to choose, but for me, it's always going to be life.
Wow.
That's how I see it. But, this is a no-brainer in that this subject is definitely polarizing. And polarizing to the point where it upsets people.
And I get this one.
And it can end relationships.
Yeah.
It's definitely, it's one you have to, what's the word I'm looking for? You gotta be careful with this one. You gotta skate on this one.
And I would say, when it comes to this one, I get the polarization with this one specifically because it so directly impacts the individuals. It's like if you come from the pro-choice camp, it's almost like you're saying, I want dominion over someone else's body. And I could see where they would have problems with that. But then I could also see the argument that when does that thing inside of the woman become a human life? And if you believe it's a life, shouldn't you value it the same as all other life? Where I don't have an answer to this one, I'm kind of like Michael, where, I would not, have an abortion, and obviously I'm a guy, so I can't, but like, me and my wife, we've talked about this. My wife was born, she was born and adopted post Roe v. Wade. So it's one that we've really kind of thought about because her mother, the person who gave birth to her, could have chosen to end her life and did not. So, and I would have been very, I guess I would have known, but, losing my wife would be huge. And it could have been, but at what point does she become Christian? And that's where I don't know. And, but I can really see why both sides are really passionate about this one because, on one side you're defending, and trying to value human life. And on the other side, you're trying to protect yourself from being controlled by outside disinterested parties. Not worried about the concerns and circumstances of your individual life. That's a tough subject. So we'll move on from there to civil rights. And this can cover a whole slew of things from race, gender, sexuality, all kinds of things kind of fall into here, but is how do you treat other people?
And how do big groups of people treat other big groups of people? Doesn't have to be on an individual scale. Like I was just watching a show the other day, and one of the characters, the show is Glitch, which takes place in Australia. It's about 6 people who come back to life from different time periods, and they literally crawl out of their graves, but they're not undead; they are alive again.
And are they? Are they out of? Is it like a fish out of story time, where it's like they're all together in a different time, or do they come back to life in the time, like shortly after they died, or something like that?
For different characters, it's different. There's one character who's only been dead for 2 years. There's one character who's been dead for like 150 years.
So they kind of play around with it.
They play around with it. But one of the characters, when he meets this young kid, calls him Abo, and the kid goes, "Whoa, don't call me that," which is short for Aborigine. And there has been big racial issues between white Australians and Aborigines. So that's a thing where they just kind of touch base on it because the character was so old that terminology was still used in his time. And the kid was like, no, you don't get to talk to me.
You can't go there. And to be honest, this is one, gender you see a lot in science fiction and even in fantasy sometimes, where people can get into that, because if you create another completely different race, it's very easy to talk about what it means to be gender fluid, or maybe a race can switch sexes. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can do with that when you're not dealing with humans. It's you don't have to try and fit it into the biology of what we consider human. Race is one that will get dealt with in mine, and a lot of it's ethnically based in my world. And I try not to parrot too much, but if over time people start seeing, that sometimes races treat each other bad, it's what happens. Orcs in my human lands are second-class citizens, and vice versa. So what does the treatment look like? What happens in those scenarios? How is it different? Those are things that are easy to explore. And in a way, the further you can distance it from Earth, because, you're not just saying it's like, African American versus American, or pick specific races in America, or any races that come up in your country and deal with it in the same way. And I always advise against doing that unless you're doing an all Earth, because, you kind of have to force in the conclusion, which you could do, and then work back to the world building. But, for me, I believe in sort of organically and naturally sort of taking inspirations and growing from that, and then building stories from the area. So it doesn't work for the way I do stuff. Political ideologies, this is a big one, right now. I mean, with the previous presidential election of Trump, I mean, that election ended marriages. And for me, I don't like Republicans. I don't like Democrats. I don't like our two-party system. I don't think they represent anyone very well except for themselves and the people who give them money. And I could be wrong, but that is my opinion. But I think, for the people who are still wrapped up in, this Republican or Democratic ideology, as a third party, I can see them shifting their arguments based off of who won the last presidential election. I can see the exact same arguments Democrats are using to try and stop Republican health care that the Republicans use to try and stop the Democratic health care. And neither side seems to get this. And if you're one of those two sides, you probably think I'm an idiot right now, but oh well, read what people say.
The next one we got here is media. Mm-hmm. And I feel like media is one that can really jump right in there hand in hand with politics, because, I mean, that's how most of us get fed our politics, is through the media. And I mean, I think I don't have a love-hate relationship with media. I think I have a hate-hate relationship with media.
Yeah. I don't necessarily I do. But
yeah, I think I'd get a lot of I read a lot of stuff on the internet, but at the same time, you really have to be careful about your sources on the internet as well. Just as you would on any network. Everyone's like, I mean, it used to be like, oh, news is supposed to be non-biased, but
yeah, I don't see that anymore.
That is long the way of the dodo now.
It's more about telling a narrative to increase your ratings. And to me,
it's all about sales. As
this person who doesn't really like either side, I see people say, fake news network, for Fox or the Clinton news network or the communist news network for CNN. And who knows what they say about MSNBC, but it's irrelevant to me. It's like you have to understand that it appears that all of these networks tell stories because they're trying to tell a story. They're looking for facts to fit into a narrative. They're not trying to relate news to me anymore. And I do watch multiple news networks. I just go in with the frame of mind that I'm hearing one perspective of something.
I don't know if I totally agree with the media being a polarizing subject. I think they might be ones that choose polarizing issues. But I think most people wouldn't argue about, like, say, a media outlet as you know what I mean? Like, I don't think that if I got into a discussion about CNN as a corporation, that it would spark heavy debate.
Maybe not CNN, but talk about the mainstream media and are they fair? The mainstream media in this country has a lower approval rating than the president, than Congress, either house. The media has a worse approval rating by the people. Pretty much every time they do a poll. And so the thing is, it's kind of like your congressman, right? People will say Congress has a record low approval rating, but then like 70, probably like 90% or plus of the incumbents get reelected because it's not my guy. So they won't get rid of their guy because they're doing it right, but it's those other ones. So I don't like it in general, but most people, at least in the United States, and I don't know about this worldwide, have a negative opinion about the media. And there's a different angle to this one as well, too. What is the effect of media? Is television good for you? It's either yes or no. Do video games cause violence? It's either yes or no. There's no middle ground in any of this.
The answer to that one is no, by the way.
Well, you could argue for video games that if you look at a graph of video game sales, violent first-person shooter video game sales, and look at the murder rate in the United States, you're going to see as the murder rate comes down, violent video game sales go up. Whether or not it's good or that's even true or just a correlation, I don't know. Because unlike a lot of people, I don't claim to be a scientist. I do look at studies and I try and make opinions, but I'm making the best guess I can in the time I have as a human. Now, healthcare systems, in the U.S., this is polarizing right now. It's either you want socialist healthcare or you want to have greedy capitalists killing off your grandparents. Those seem to be the only two choices I can choose from, and I kind of don't think either one of those sound very appealing. I'm just saying.
Funny, I haven't heard this grandparent killing healthcare system act come up.
Well, I remember. Well, think about it. It's like go to the news and look at what the Democrats are saying about the Republican healthcare system, right? It will kill people. I've heard that phrase so many times, it will kill people. Well, in theory, either side who makes decisions about healthcare for other people are going to affect the lives of people. Yep. So, I mean, that's kind of, in my mind, a false argument that both sides use against each other. I think there are plenty of Democrats I know who don't want socialized healthcare, not even all of them who want a single payer system think a socialist, like a European version, is always the best model. I could be wrong because once again, I'm an outsider to this argument. Neither, the Republican current last healthcare plan sounded good to me, and the Affordable Care Act is collapsing. I'm watching it happen. I'm watching, there are counties in this country now where 0 people have access to an individual healthcare plan. So, like it or not, when you get into this kind of stuff, it will polarize people. And this is one, especially in the U.S. right now, why these debates are going on. And it's not done just because the Republican healthcare plan failed, because there's still trouble brewing. The fight is going to continue until the healthcare system finds equilibrium, whatever it is, whether it happens to be more of a single payer system or it happens to be more of a free market system or a corporate run system. Whatever it ends up being. Now, the next one, pro or anti-war. I don't know. Maybe this is me as a soldier. I think that's a very simplistic look at things, where I typically lean more towards anti-war, I guess, personally.
Can I modify this one a little bit?
No.
Because I think that there's a lot of people that are out there that are not necessarily pro-war so much as they are pro a given conflict or pro a given reason to fight in a given region of the world. So it's not like they're like, yay, war, let's do war. It's like, well, there's the instability in this area, and there could be big backlashes, or they're doing horrible things against
go look at Syria. You can make a good argument that they're horrible people.
So.
Yeah. And I agree with you, but that's the binary, right? You're either pro or anti. I would imagine most people I've talked to are neither pro or anti. There are some people who are truly pacifist, who believe under no circumstances should our government or any others use force on anyone. But that's a tiny percentage of people who really believe it.
Yeah. And if everybody believed it, then of course there would be no war. We'd all be
that would be awesome.
But, yeah.
And I know very few people who are like, I'm pro-war, I want war all of the time. But that's where the polarization ends up, is that it's
absolutely
you're either pro or against. And that's kind of how all of these polarized subjects end up.
I want you guys also, while you're listening to all these subjects, like there's certainly some of these subjects that I would steer clear of, and that's just my personal, views as a writer. But a lot of these are opportunities. A lot of these are, if you haven't considered using them in a story before, they're a creative opportunity for you to, bring an opinion and maybe something original on a given subject to, or a new perspective, a new way to present approaching a given thing that is polarizing. So think about this list. This list is not avoid all these things,
No.
Like these really should be considered and looked at as an opportunity for conflicts in your stories, for certainly character development if you've got a character with polarizing opinions on all of these subjects. So
I mean, think about it. If you're looking for a non-corporate, non-government, non-fat cat villain, look to the media. People dislike them right now. It's a great opportunity for you. In a way, it's an advantage to do that. And the thing is, if you leave it outside of politics and it's just the bad guy happens to be a reporter, it's not even about his reporting. It's about the individual. People will buy it because if you look at demographically, most Democrats and most Republicans in the United States think the media is unfair to their side.
Depends on the network.
They're probably, it probably has more to do with that. But another interesting one, and this one I made very generic because you can almost go like department by department or policy by policy.
Yeah, you really can.
It will flip who wants government control or not. But, what is the appropriate amount of government control, and what should the government be involved in? Or maybe you don't have the choice and the government dictates that, but those can all be polarizing, topics. So if you create a police state, that will offend a lot of people. But let's be honest, there's a lot of great fiction about police states. Yeah. But I think that's another one where there's a lot of, like I said, you can go almost policy by policy here on anything that we've talked about, or a lot of things we haven't talked about. Should there be a Department of Education?
I heard
there are people who would say no, or people who say yes.
I heard they made a couple of dollars on those Hunger Games books.
Hunger Games. I mean, Brazil, 1984, 1985. I mean, there's just all kinds of stuff. What was Clockwork Orange? Oh my goodness. What should the government do when reforming villains, and does it work? Wow. Powerful story. And talk about one that hit a lot of these polarizing subjects. Now, economic systems. If you make something that people decided is...
Did you actually state the bullet point there? Because you got right into talking about different policies, but the whole that whole subject falls under the idea of governmental control and governmental influence.
How much control should the government have over particular subjects?
Yeah. I just wanted to make sure that statement got out there before we moved on to economic systems.
Yeah, and once again, the classic one that's been around for a couple hundred years now and doesn't seem to be going away is socialism versus capitalism. It's an idea that's going to stick around. People have strong opinions with both ways. And this is one where maybe it's not so polarized. There are people polarized on both sides of it, and then there are a lot of people who sort of take what they think works. So, but I do think there's strong polarized groups on both sides of this argument. And the next one's even trickier.
That's all you wanted to say about economic systems?
Yeah, I mean, I can go into it, but, what is there to say besides, it's pretty much a socialist versus capitalist argument.
Right.
And even, now you'll see people argue over even what the word capitalism means. Does it mean corporate control or does it mean free markets? And is there a difference? Yeah. But now the next one I want to get into here is cultural appropriation. And this comes at it from two angles. My wife showed me a picture on the internet where it was this, what appeared to be a white lady who had some feathers in her hair and took a picture next to a wolf. And people went off when she posted it about her appropriating Native American culture. Now, that's kind of a broad statement because they're assuming from someone's physical looks what their race is, what their cultural, how they grew up. I try not to do that because, especially in the United States, there's been a lot of different like nationalities, ethnicities, races, whatever you want to call them, interbreeding for a long time for good and bad reasons. But it's happened. So I don't know how people grow up. I try not to make assumptions there, but maybe that makes me a wussy. But I don't know. But the thing is, you have to be also careful too. Is when you drive your ideas from dominant, like Western European or United States, some people have been hurt and tremendously hurt by those groups, and they might take offense. So, be careful, especially if taking Earth-like attributes and directly transposing them into a fantasy culture, especially not an Earth-like one. When certain words you use, certain things you use could offend people because of a thing one culture has done to another one. Or sometimes groups feel offended when people take and especially screw up a culture. So if it looks too close to it, but it's not it could cause offense too. So there's a lot of levels that people do get offended here. And I see the internet blow up on this one a lot. So, especially when you deal with cultures, that's something you have to keep in mind.
I feel that this is one of those tricky ones that's unfairly tricky. If somebody decides that they want to immerse themselves in a new culture, so they get into something, they decide they come upon a culture they really are interested in, it can very easily be misconstrued as cultural appropriation by some people. So I feel like there's a careful way. There's one thing to somebody enjoying and wanting to celebrate another culture, and there's another thing where they are trying to either say something negative about the other culture by doing something with it, or trying to steal something from it as if it's their own. That's a tricky, tricky one.
I think this one, and when you go back into civil rights, a lot of times people have different definitions of what certain terms mean too. So what I think cultural appropriation might not be exactly what someone else says. And I think a lot of the fights happen over different definitions. And we don't necessarily have a great grasp on what it means. At least I've not had a lot of these things, settled in my mind through hearing a rational discussion about them. And like I said, I've seen that a lot here. When you get into some discussions about gender, I've seen people say there's anywhere from strictly 2 genders to a nearly equal amount of genders as there are people, if not the same number. Like every individual is their own gender. And as the cultures grow and they change, definitions could definitely change, and I have no issue with that. But, as you're transitioning, it's hard to know what is the correct term to use, what is not the correct term to use. And if you get someone's terms right by doing research, there's probably someone else out there in some of these issues that have a different definition who could still be offended. And so realize, especially you start getting to those kind of issues, there's a great chance you're going to offend people if your work gets noticed. And now the next one, which I think is a real tough one to do, is slavery. And there's just, it's still, there are still lots of slaves in our world, and I think most people, at least in modern societies, are against the idea of slavery at all. And sometimes the word itself gets appropriated. Like I've heard socialists use the term of wage slavery, which is not the same thing as like the ancient version of slavery. And to me, I think that's almost an offensive categorization. But once again, I could be wrong. But the thing is, that's one. If you delve into that one, it's very much on the surface of people throughout the world, because there are still, I think there's one nation, and I forget which one it is, so I'm not going to say the name, because one, I'd probably mispronounce it, and two, I would, if I get the name of the country wrong, I'd feel bad. But I believe 1 in 4 people is a slave in that country in the modern world today. There are people whose, family not going too far back have been enslaved, and they are still affected by that. Whether or not you agree they should be able to is not the point. They are.
It still happens here in the United States. It just shows up in a different term. Indentured servitude from immigrants who get smuggled into the country, sex slavery, and the.
But the idea in the U.S. and in most countries, it's like, hopefully the wrath, at least legally, the systems are set up. The wrath will come down on people. There are countries where it is legal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, that's a real tough subject. And going back to one that I think still has a bad taste, because not too long ago, there were lots of colonies up until the end of World War II is when most of the colonies were finally given up by the European powers. So the idea of colonialism and imperialism are things that are probably going to generate passions in people, so there's, once again, not saying you don't cover these topics, or saying just understand that if you get into a story and your major culture is going around colonizing people, even if they're doing it for, the good reason, there were people here who've either lived through colonization, or maybe their parents did or their grandparents did. People are worried about imperialism today. You're still worried about countries growing up, and even if they don't necessarily take over and annex the country the way they used to, are they stepping in on the sovereignty of other countries? That's a big concern, and in many ways, because even here in the U.S., where a lot of people think, the U.S. is an imperial power, today, there are people in the U.S. who are worried about like the UN or other sources coming in and influencing sovereignty in our country. So in a way, they don't call it imperialism, but it's the same type of concern that comes through people. So there's lots of different ways to get into this one, and I think it's a really tough one to get into. And it's one that probably needs to be explored, don't get me wrong, but understand that people will have passionate views about it. I'll have Mike do the next two.
Colonization and imperialism, which, I mean, you kind of talked a bit about this, so you should... did you say everything that you wanted to say about that?
If you want to add something in with that before we move on.
Yeah, great. I get to these two really fun ones at the end. I'm kind of surprised you didn't actually reorder these, because these last two are about the most horrible things that you can think of, which is probably
to me, I actually reverse ordered them. The closer you get to the bottom, like these last four, to me, I have a binary definition of these. So,
so genocide.
Yeah.
Let's just wipe out a whole people. Let's wipe out.
And however you define it as an ethnicity or on a racial, however you define it, if you want to kill a bunch of people, I'm just going to go right here and say you're a scumbag.
Yep, I think that's a fair statement. Like, you can get into, any type of story. Actually, this kind of ties back into the very top. Let me go back for just a second if I can roll back up on this list. You had said something early on. It might even have been before we got into the list, and I didn't want to derail what you were talking about, but it reminded me of Man in the High Tower, which is something that you could talk more on, because I haven't started watching it yet. But obviously, anything dealing with World War II gets into genocide. Anything,
or political systems, government control.
Yeah.
I mean, you get into that discussion, and it hits all of these things. Yeah, and actually, when we get to the real world task, you'll see that we'll be talking about that.
And the last one we have here is rape.
Yeah.
The thing that I found, like, I don't even know if I want to use the word offensive, because it's kind of is just inherent with anything you're going to talk about regarding rape. But I heard the term rape culture probably a year, maybe 2 years ago. And I'm like, rape culture? I'm like, there's a culture surrounding rape? Like, what is rape culture? Like, I heard this in a discussion that somebody was having about, people victims of sexual abuse. And I was just like, what on earth is rape culture?
Well, and that's one of those where it's like, I've heard about that term recently, probably over the past year. I've started hearing that term. And that's one of those terms where every time I hear someone else talk about it, it's slightly different. So I need to know more about what that term means. But in general, from my understanding, it's the idea that the society itself in some way endorses rape. And so that's one thing but it will get talked about if they feel there's a rape culture in your book. Trust me, it will come out, and there are activists who are very, very much worked up about this. And
rightfully so.
Yeah, because once again, if a society does support rape is one of the most to me, I would rather be murdered than raped. Because you have to live with the consequences of rape, murder, whatever happens next happens. So at least the suffering is ended, I guess. So, I find this one, I don't even like reading. I don't enjoy watching things about rape. And that's me, but it's a very powerful emotional thing. And I would be upfront with people if I even dealt with it directly in a book that it existed there, because, I don't think the term itself would, emotionally trigger someone who's been raped. But, if you get the closer you get, the more description you add to it, you might bring up sensory emotions that people could remind them of experiences that have happened to them. But that is a real tough one. And if you want to go there in your art, be warned that, I think if it becomes popular, it will dominate. And I think there was a rape scene in Game of Thrones, which dominated the news for a while. So understand that. That's something. I don't know that, and maybe I'm wrong, but just to me, that is just a horrific thing any way you look at it. Now, what I'm not, what we're really trying to get to in this episode is not what positions are right or wrong. I know some of our opinions probably came out, and I do appreciate anyone who's still here. Even if you've disagreed with some of the things we said, especially because, if people can have rational, discussions, talk about generalities of things, we're in trouble. But, if you've made it here, one of the things we want to say as you go forward with your art is don't do these kind of things because you want attention. Don't do these kind of things because you think that they're going to help your sales. You're like, yeah, I'll offend that group, but this other group will buy my stuff. Those are bad things to do it. Do what you feel is right for your art, and do it with your eyes wide open, and realize that even things that you didn't intend to be offensive, if someone else sees them in one of these polarizing categories, or another polarizing category that I forgot to mention here, which would make me a jerk, any of those things that are here, any of those things that come through, either that you're purposely doing or someone derives from your work, have your eyes wide open. It's a possibility when you share your stuff in the age of the internet. Even someone misinterpreting something that you say, you could have a million memes about it within, a day. So just understand that this is something that can and might affect you as you move forward in sharing your work. I don't think you should be afraid of it, but just realize that it's a possibility to be there. Have your eyes wide open and do what you feel is right for your art. And And if you go into these subjects and you want to cover them and you're not really well versed, which I'm not really well versed in a lot of these issues. Some of them I'm more versed than other ones. I'm sort of a generalist for knowledge. I like to put my feet into lots of areas. But if you're going to really delve in and make something especially central to your work, make sure to do some research and do the best job you can to present it in a way that works, because people are very sophisticated, and just once again, keep your eyes open.
I was just going to say that. Make sure to do your research. If you're going to take one of these on, make sure that you are the new expert on it, not just have an opinion. There's a lot of people out there that just have opinions on this stuff. Be informed about it, because someone's probably going to take you to task on it at some point, and you're going to have to explain your position at the very least, if not defend it. And I just like what you're saying before, like, don't just stick this stuff in there for the sake of being salacious. I don't think you need to avoid these subjects, but you also don't need to hone in on them just for the sake of making something controversial. I mean, if you intend to make something controversial, like that's your goal, then do your research, form an opinion, and write something intelligent. And that's fine. But if you're just going to stick stuff in there because you know it's going to piss people off or get people's ire up,
makes you troll.
Yeah, it does. That's actually, I couldn't have said it better. That it makes you a troll. So, and I don't think the world has enough bridges for all the trolls we have in the world.
And I think if your strategy is to sell books by being controversial, you're probably going to find out that it might backfire. It's probably more likely than not to backfire on you. So it's a real dumb marketing plan. Of course, I have no proof of this. This is just my opinion. Now, Michael, what is the real world task of the day?
Let's see here. The real world task of the day is look at. I don't know what you mean by this.
Work in progress.
I see. Okay. So look at your work in progress and identify areas that might be some of your polarizing topics. Like take a look at what you're dealing with, and you might discover that there's something there that might need a little more sensitivity or a little more research, as we have stated, but we cannot overstate. Or maybe there's an untapped opportunity in there that you can use one of these subjects to the advantage of your storytelling.
Yeah. Or, too, if you heavily borrow from Earth to create a different world, realize that you might unintentionally step into some of these areas too. So, like I said, the closer it resembles Earth, the more likely it is to get into someone's mind through a pre-existing lens. And if that's not your intention, understand that it could be a side effect. Now, for the real world task of the day, watch The Man in the High Castle.
I need to take this real world task. I haven't gotten to it yet.
Yeah, and I need to read Ready Player One before the TV show comes out. But,
movie.
Oh, it's going to be a movie, not a TV show?
Yeah, it's a movie. Yeah,
I'm so used to everything coming out as a TV show now.
It should. It'd be cool as a TV show. There's a lot they could do with it.
I've got to warn people up front. It's essentially about. I'm going to call it an alternate Earth, even though I've watched what's come out so far. I can't really definitively say that, but it's definitely an alternate history version of where the United States lost World War II. The Allies lost, actually all of us, not just the United States. And it takes place in the United States where everything west of the Rockies is controlled by the Imperial Japanese government, and there's a sort of no man's land in the Rockies, and everything on the other side is under control of the Third Reich. It is powerful beyond the fact it's Nazis. Because it's Nazis, it really delves not only into polarizing topics. That name itself is polarizing. The insignia, the swastika on the battle flag is polarizing. These guys have all of the beliefs of the Nazis. And what does the world look like essentially when the show starts? What does it look like? And I won't give you any more spoilers from there, but trust me, most of these polarizing topics are covered in there. And it can be disturbing. So if you're not open to that, maybe avoid it. But I like to work through that kind of stuff. So I kind of go full in. So go ahead and watch The Man at High Castle. There'll be links to some of the stuff that we talked about in the show notes here. And if you are an Amazon Prime member, I believe it is I think it's Amazon Prime Original. So you need Amazon Prime to watch it. And if you're not, if you go to the show notes, there's a link and you can get a free trial for Amazon Prime. I like it. I use it. I get like free shipping was the reason why we get it. But there's a lot of great TV, movies, and documentaries that I can get from there as well too. So go ahead, go to the show notes to check that stuff out if you want to. And we will see you next time in a much less fun topic. Oh.
No, we won't.
Thank you for still listening.
No.
Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil. We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends, and so would they. If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting by showing them Stitcher or iTunes, or, best of all, just send them to our website, www.gardul.com. That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the mithril's hot.